Lawyers for Donald Trump's one-time personal attorney, Rudolph Giuliani, have been informed that Giuliani is now a target of the criminal investigation into election interference playing out in Georgia. That is according to a new interview in the New York Times with Giuliani attorney Robert Costello about the investigation being spearheaded by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. Earlier this summer, prosecutors from Willis's team asked witnesses during grand jury testimony about Giuliani's activities in regards to his efforts to keep Donald Trump in power. Giuliani scheduled to appear before that special grand jury in Atlanta on Wednesday. We're back with our panel. I want to start. We understand that Costello in this New York Times piece says that Giuliani would probably invoke attorney-client privilege and take the fifth. He says if these people think he's going to talk about conversations between him and President Trump, they're delusional, Mr. Costello said. Mr. Costello, obviously familiar with delusional people, having represented Rudolph Giuliani in this case. Jackie, I ask you, Rudy's been in a lot of trouble for a while now. Tell us how he got to this place as the target of this investigation and whether there's what the prospects are for him being able to maybe try to wriggle out of it.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a long time coming, John. Rudy Giuliani was deeply involved for an extended period of time in the former president's efforts to overturn the results of the election. And Fani Willis has been investigating some time what she's called a multi-state coordinated plan by the Trump campaign to influence the results of the November 2020 election in Georgia and elsewhere. We know that Rudy Giuliani was one of the main points of contact for the Trump campaign and for local officials on the ground in Georgia to try to overturn the results of the election, including implementing the fake slate of electors plans, which was nearly pulled off in some of these battleground states. We also know that Lindsey Graham has been asked as well to appear in this case. His legal team is planning to appeal the decision that was made recently that he must testify in the probe. But this has been a fascinating case to watch that's been running parallel with all of the other criminal investigations going on into, again, former President Trump's efforts to overturn the results of the election.
So last week, Frank Figliuzzi, there was, in the middle of the kind of cascading news around Trump and Mar-a-Lago, there were a lot of things that happened, some of which we didn't pay very much attention to. I will say that one that I really was regretting we didn't get to focus on was Giuliani's lawyer saying that when it comes to this upcoming appearance before the grand jury on Wednesday, that he could not. His health was poor and he would not be able to make it down. There's no way he could possibly fly to Atlanta, given that his health was bad. They went and made this case before the judge. I want to play the sound of Judge McBurney, what he had to say to that when the Giuliani lawyers tried to keep their man from having to go visit the Peachtree State.
The medical professional said that Mr. Giuliani is not cleared for air travel, AIR. John Madden drove all over the country in his big bus from stadium to stadium. So one thing we need to explore is whether Mr. Giuliani could get here without jeopardizing his recovery and his health on a train, on a bus, or Uber, whatever it would be. The focus seems to have been he's got to be on a plane. And New York is not close to Atlanta, but it's not traveling from Fairbanks.
The judge is talking sense there, Frank, and I would also say not exhibiting a lot of sympathy for Rudy's claims, basically saying, hey, man, bus, train, Uber, be John Madden. I don't think that's possible. John Madden, a beloved figure in America. Tell us what this means that Giuliani has now been named as a target of this investigation. What is he now facing?
He may be facing a midnight train to Georgia, to quote lyrics from Gladys Knight and the Pips. Look, he's jammed up here. Being named a target, your lawyer being told, hey, your client's a target, it's really bad. It means that the grand jury and the prosecutors are thinking, yeah, we're about to charge you. It's imminent, right? You are under criminal investigation, and your name is in the header of the investigation. You're one of the named subjects, and it's coming. And it's coming faster than you think. And look, his options are not good. If he claims attorney-client privilege, right, it's an admission that Trump told him to do this illegal stuff in Georgia. It's a no-win for him. And all the DA has to say is, well, okay, that's very interesting. First, your privilege doesn't extend to criminality, number one. Number two, we could stay away from what Trump said to you if you think that's privilege. Let's just investigate what you did all by yourself with Georgia officials in an attempt to unlawfully overturn the Georgia election. We're focused on you. So it's really a no-win situation. He's going to have to plead the fifth or incriminate himself. It's not looking good for Rudy right now.
John Brennan, with Frankie Figs having just quoted Gladys Knight and the Pips, I'm going to wait maybe a Ray Charles invocation from you, Georgia, on your mind. My question, though, is this. A week ago, we would have said this Georgia case really mattered, that it was like, that this was one of the central problems. Trump has a world of legal problems. He's got the Georgia problem. He's got, well, look at these headlines of all these things that are happening to him in terms of his allies are in legal trouble. The Politico says that Justice Department subpoenas former Trump White House lawyer Eric Hirschman. Politico says judge orders Lindsey Graham to testify on the Atlanta area Trump probe. We've been learning about other Trump allies who've been subpoenaed and compelled to testify in these various probes. They're all over the place, lots of probes. The one thing that was on no one's radar screen was the thing that now, according to George Conway, is the shortest distance between Donald Trump and an orange jumpsuit. Does it surprise you that it turns out to be a thing related to classified materials and foreign policy and not something related to 1/6, election interference, or his personal businesses, other things? That's might be the thing that ends up bringing Trump down.
Well, I don't know if it's surprising, but clearly, I think Donald Trump has had a history of trying to skirt the law and to do things that are rather unethical and unprincipled, whether it be in the business world or the government world, but also now in his post-presidential life. The questions remain whether or not he has intentionally also lied and deceived the government in terms of what was being held at Mar-a-Lago. So when I hear from these legal experts and others about the potential for indictments, whether it be for Trump or Giuliani, whatever, I'm not a lawyer, but without getting too technical, I think both Rudy and Trump are screwed.
Well, that's putting it in plain English. God knows you don't need a law degree to understand that. Jackie Alemany, I got one last quick question for you, which is, we referred before to Trump's declassification defense, one of many that they've floated of late. You're reporting on this story, and what you get from them is kind of typically Trumpian, changing their story in mutually often contradictory ways over time, but they're flinging stuff at the wall like a bunch of crazed monkeys. And do you have a sense that there's a defense that they're going to settle on and that's going to be now the defense? Or are you going to continue to see this kind of arguing the alternative where just basically any argument they're going to fling at reporters, fling at the courts, fling in the political system and see if something sticks?
Yeah, well, despite all the flinging, the one thing that has remained consistent is that Trump's team has not denied that there was classified information on the premises. Now it's just trying to find ways to discredit the work of the FBI and discredit the classification process more broadly speaking. And it is worth really clearly pointing out that no, the declassification process does not work the way Kash Patel has said, and that actually it would require communication and sign off from the agency head in order to declassify a certain document in order to ensure that there wasn't any risk to national security. But I think that the final defense of the Trump team has yet to be landed on. It's something that the former president is huddling with his allies and trying to figure out at Bedminster today. We knew and reported last week that he did try to bring on lawyer John Sale, who was a prominent prosecutor during the Watergate hearings, and Sale ultimately said he was honored to be asked, but turned down the offer to represent the former president. So they are trying to stitch together some sort of defense, but I do think at the end of the day, Trump has sort of gone through most of the lawyers who, at least high caliber lawyers who would be willing to represent him in such a matter. And that's why we're seeing some of the most prominent voices out there are people like Kash Patel, Lindsey Halligan, lawyers that maybe sort of we've never heard of before and do not have experience in defending white collar criminal cases.